Good afternoon and welcome to today's 8 by 10 inch acrylic landscape lesson. As you can see from our reference photo, I'm going to be working on this beautiful tropical scene. You have these rolling hills in the sunset. You have these lovely, highly detailed tropical trees. It's going to be quite an original one, quite a fun one. And as per usual, we have our brushes off to the side. You can see there's a fan brush, a liner, and a small filbert. In my hand, we do have a large flat-headed brush. So again, the classics. As for our pigments, we have a titanium white, cadmium yellow deep hue, cadmium orange, and oxide black, and this green right here is simply in olive green. I really like this green for sunsets because it isn't too saturated. It's a little bit more as if there are shadows being cast on that green, and it's still quite earthy. So wonderful for these very natural settings. With that, again, as per usual, welcome to the painting lesson. I hope you are ready to make something special or something that makes you feel good, something that just, gets those creative parts of the brain flowing. And we are going to begin with a larger flat-headed brush. We're going to begin in the background. And how do we do that? How do we begin mixing? Of course, we begin by making sure our brush is nice and damp. I'm going to start around the sun here. And we're going to do so by grabbing an abundance of our titanium white, our cadmium yellow deep hue. It's not a cadmium yellow, it is a cadmium yellow deep hue, so it has some extra warmth in it. And this would be great for the area right here. Nice and simple, apply a favorable amount of it, then we'll add a little bit of our cadmium orange, cadmium yellow, place that on both sides and maybe towards the bottom. Then we'll blend all of that out. Now, I'm going to double down on that orange. As you can see, double down on the yellow. And we're going to try to make the base of our sunset more orange, more warm, just a real sun-soaked space. We can bring this off over a lot of our trees. And then when it comes time to blending, we are going to just very softly move the brush from one pigment into the next, trying not to leave little strokes. Then we'll mix the two together, fill up this area towards the top, because you do want this to get more and more yellow as you work towards the top. And this is all still wet because our brush is nice and damp. That is going to make such a big impact on your blends. So from there, we're going to go brighter. We're going to go more yellow as we work our way up. More yellow, more titanium white. The titanium white's really going to help thicken the yellow, which can innately be a bit more of a thin hue. So we'll just apply that up here, all the way across. If we have to redraw our sketch, that's okay. We can always just refer back to the traceable or the real-time drawing video. You're up here on Patreon, so you do have access to both of those, and they should help make your life a whole lot easier. If you love painting, you don't really love drawing, that's, again, kind of your cheat sheet to get you into the drawing process. As we get higher, we get more titanium white in the mix. So we're just going to keep working that in. There we go, not bad, not bad. And being relatively quick for the sake of dry time, though I'm not worried about it because again, we are keeping our brush nice and damp. I can see in the reference photo that the very top has a little bit more orange, a little bit more warmth to it. So I'm just going to grab a hint more of that, give it a slight vignette look. And as you can see, our pigments are a little bit thin because of all of the water we've been using. So we'll probably go in with a second layer, but that's great. That just gives us an opportunity to make sure everything is perfect and the way we really want it to be, right? Your first layer is often not going to be your final layer. It's more so a test layer, a layer to just feel comfy with what you're doing. And that's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing. Okay, now at this point, I think through here we want a bit more yellow. So we'll just work that in the middle. It's all still relatively damp. Already like that better. Again, more yellow. I like to work with an X-shaped pattern when moving the pigment not only left and right but up and down, because it helps you move pigment in all directions. And I do so relatively softly, that way I don't accidentally make things with hard, sharp lines. So far, so good though. Again, I'm grabbing a little bit more orange, a little bit more yellow for the very top. But then we have this space in the middle. It's a little bit more titanium white heavy. We're just going to make sure this is all nice and thick. Love doing skies in the beginning because it is just a nice way to get comfortable with the paint after taking a break, especially if you paint once a week. Doing a nice big sky like this is just it's a good little intro. So it can take some time and you can take your time with it, but that's really the point. I'm going to go in with a bit more orange for the base. Round 2 with that as well. I'm really excited about this. We don't typically do tropical scenes like that on the channel, but I found a lot of inspiration as of late, and I'm excited to try some of these different palettes, different subjects. So here's to step number 1 as we learn together. That's really the beauty of art like this, right? You can just learn new subjects forever, even in the landscape painting space. I think some people, they say, oh, I'm going to learn portraits this month and I'll learn landscapes the next month, and that's all well and good, but once you find what you really love subject-wise, you can really double down on it for a lifetime. Making sure I love this. Now at this point, I want to start working on that beautiful sun in the middle. So what we're going to do for that is we're actually going to pick up the filbert brush because it has a nice rounded edge. We're going to make that nice and damp. Of course, we'll take off the excess pigment. Then we're going to head over to our mix, grab some of that titanium white, a little bit more of our yellow. We're specifically mixing these two together, and we need a brighter pigment than what we have here. I think this will actually work quite well. So I'm going to go in with our first application, and I'm going to try to do is create this cupping shape where we have where the sun will be, but then I'm blending it out towards the left and the right, that we get this hazy look from the sun. There we go. It's a great start. It's a great start. Again, needs to be yellow, needs to be brighter. This is something that will be fairly iterative, that we go into it multiple times, fix it up, build it up, like so. We can even switch to the liner brush for the real details. Right now I'm just trying to get the essence of it. So I'll throw in some more light. Soften the top, which means we blend the top, but we don't blend the bottom. can work this in a rounded motion if you want some nice little brush strokes in there, or you can blend it out with a filbert if you don't. But in any case, we want a nice warm sun right through there. There we go. Good start. And back to the filbert, where we're going to blend the surrounding areas and that warmth and that saturation outwards. You do a soft blend towards the top, keeping the base sharp. Again, just making it hazy. Good start, good start. We also have these nice little clouds showing through. I think we mix all of our yellows and oranges and whites through here, and we just create these nice little light clouds working their way through the sky. Nothing complicated. As it gets farther away, it'll probably get a little less dramatic. We want slightly more yellow in the mix. You're going to try to keep the base relatively sharp. The top, again, blends more, it gets softer. It's a way a lot of these clouds are rendered. Sharp bases, soft tops. And you want inconsistencies, so you can see I'm doing lots of taps. Sometimes I'm moving upwards. And these ones are pretty subtle up here, which I like. You want some clouds to be more subtle than others. You want some to just kind of get lost in the subject as a whole. Others to stand out. But again, nice and easy start. Now we're going to do a larger layer over the sky, but before we do, I want to start incorporating some of the distant land that you can see right through here. There's many steps that create all of the depth. And for that, I think we start with a good amount of our titanium white, orange, a little bit of our oxide black for the first time. We're trying to make a slightly more grayed, darker version of what we had right here. And for that, we're just going to work this all the way across, like so. I think I need it to be quite a bit brighter, because we want this to happen slowly. We want a natural transition from the sky into the land. So we'll just interject this. And we'll softly move it into the sky so that they semi-blend. This is just going to make it feel very distant, beautiful. As we get closer, we're going to increase the amount of oxide black and our orange. Not dramatically, but a little bit. And now I'm going to work this up through here and then back down. Giving it little intricacies, you want bits that stick out, pop up, just make it more unique. Work that down. And as we get towards the bottom, we're going to make a change to the mix. We're going to make it a little more titanium white heavy. That way it looks like there's a mist at that base. Giving this set of protruding landmass is a little bit of extra depth as well. Don't want too much. You don't want it to be perfect. You know what? As I look at this, I want the top to be a little bit brighter too. So I'm just going to go back over that momentarily. It's good. It gives us an opportunity to make it thicker, which is something I wanted to do anyway. That looks so much better. Okay. Then we can interject more of that highlight. You can see we're just going back and forth, as we've talked about, as we tend and try to do. There we are, there we are, there we are. Wonderful. All right. I think we clean off our brush for a second, yet again, and just going to use the corner now to create some little wispy motions. This is going to add some brush strokes. Again, sometimes you want those, sometimes you don't. It can also depend on how you like your paintings to look. We don't need all of our paintings to look the same, and if you want more of these, you incorporate more. If you want less, you don't have to incorporate any. That said, we can also take our liner brush and interject little peaks and such to the tops. Just make them a little bit more unique. There we go. Kind of gets lost in the distance now. I like that effect a lot. At this point, we begin working on this larger area. And that begins with a similar color to this, a little bit more of our Naples or our cadmium yellow in it though. Definitely more oxide black, titanium white, cadmium orange, cadmium yellow. There we go. Now the edge is quite rough right now. That's a-okay, because we are soon going to go back into that edge with our liner brush and define it more intentionally. But right now we're really just trying to get the general shape and movement of this mountain, which kind of gets lost in the mist down here. So you can see how these blend into each other and connect on this side. That's something we're aiming for. I think I'll also make this area a little bit more orange because it's in direct path with the sun. Oh, it feels so good to be working with the brush again today. I was craving this all weekend. I'm painting it Saturday and I had a lovely weekend. Very much enjoyed it. However, I'd be lying if I said my mind wasn't in the art a little bit, or the art to be, rather. Just one of those things where once you get the idea of creating something in your head, it's just kind of magnetic. It sticks. You kind of problem solve in your head, kind of create in your head, kind of pre-paint in your head, before you even get to the canvas, which is great because it makes you a stronger painter for when you actually get there. But why did I want to paint? Which is good. When painting is what you do, you want to do it. Now, we have some little trees and protrusions, rocks along the sides of these. So that's really what I'm aiming to work in right now. Just small little protrusions of different kinds of trees. So sometimes they're rounded, sometimes they're a bit more protruding, a little more straight upwards. But because this is so far away, you don't want these markings or protrusions to be grand. You want them, you want the intricacies, you want the individuality, but you don't want it to be dramatic. We'll save that for the foreground. That's just a good rule of thumb for all backgrounds, really. Even when it's a silhouetted background, even when the background is this glorious sunset, you still want a lot of your efforts in the foreground. Then we need to move some of this back. So I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to my mix because I want to slowly transition this into something that can be green. And the closer we get to us, we need to interject more of those to be green hues. And yellow and oxide black, when mixed together, render a bit more of a green, far more so than an orange and an oxide black. So I'm just, as we move, again, closer to us, down these mountains, interjecting more and more yellow. This is a bit more of a thin pigment, as you can see, so I'll need to do multiple layers. But my first layer is pretty wet because I'm trying to keep the rest of this nice and wet. There we go. We're going to go a little darker, maybe a little more titanium white. We want it to be, again, more green, more gray, but we can't let it be too dark because we're saving that for the foreground. We can't let it be too green because we're saving that for the foreground. So it's really about measured increments and additions of these things. So more orange towards the top, more yellow towards the bottom. There we go. I think I hear something in the distance there. My apologies if it's a little lively. I feel like it's been pretty lively lately. But I also hope this is just a nice, relaxed painting experience. You feel like you're learning, you feel like you're having fun. Always the goals, right? Now, there is more I want to do, again, to this area, but I want to start working on this first. That way we can continue to build that depth, and then when I add a hazy light to all of it, we do so to all of it at the same time, so it's the same amount, and it's the correct amount. Now, I took a step back, as I often implore you do, so I could get some larger perspective, and I realized I wanted to increase the amount of mist that I have at the base of this. So we're just adding some titanium white to our mix. We're going in with a very watery brush, and we're just brightening up this base a little bit. Not a lot, but it means that the darker area will be now here, with the top and the bottom being brighter, though in slightly different ways, because the top will be slightly more orange and the bottom will be a little bit more greenish yellow. And outside again, a little noisy. Again, my apologies for that. Trying to paint in the middle of the day, rather around the afternoon, so things are a little more calm. But again, I think regardless of where you are in the world or what you're doing, there will be sounds, there will be noise, and that is okay. think we need to let this dry, that way we don't overwork it, and then we'll be back at the painting. Now, as an update, as I was doing that, I kind of ripped a little bit of paint off there by adding too much water, which happens, but I had to go in and fix the layer a little bit. It's not perfect, but the point here is that will happen sometimes. You will make mistakes, you will hinder the painting, and at the end of the day, that's okay. That said, I'm going to be a little more cautious this time. I'm going to take my liner brush to do some of the mixing, and I don't typically do a lot of my mixing with the liner brush because it's not that big, it doesn't do a lot, but I want to be a bit more careful with my application, with my mix, so I don't want to go in with too much, I don't want a big brush. We're just going to start by applying it here, like so, and then we'll, using a lot of water, blend it up. Like that. You can see I'm working the body into the canvas. Not the tip of the brush, but the body of the brush. We're just slowly, softly working it up. Circular motions. And this is a great way of just moving subtle amounts of pigment. Trying to interject more and more of that mist towards the base, because I think that's where a lot of the magic is. Now we'll go in with a larger amount. Again, mix that out. And if you find that there's too much water, that you're not really moving it around, or you're taking previous paint that you applied off the canvas, I just recommend letting it fully dry, going back in. It'll be a lot easier to work on. Once that's applied though, we are going to move into this section. So that's a lot closer to us in the reference photo. And we're going to begin with an abundance of our yellow, a little bit of our orange, because we still want it to be warm, but the base needs to be yellow as we transition into green. Titanium white, oxide black. We want a grayish yellow, because optically this will look green for us in the long term. Now, we can begin by applying this to the top. I think it needs to be a little bit darker actually. Much better. I'm going to work my way around all of these definitive trees that I want in. There's going to be a lot of them. That's why we're working with the larger flat-headed brush again. We're in open space. We have a lot of canvas to cover. I'm not worried about taking any paint off the canvas. We're just putting a base layer in. And already you can see the difference between the more yellow mix versus the more orange mixes. This is something that over time will look green, despite the fact that it isn't actually our green pigment, which is kind of fun. We're going to make this quite tall, start to find its way leading into here. A bit more titanium white, because again, this isn't the area that's meant to be that dark. It's just the beginning of it. I'm going to go over my edges a couple of times to make sure they're nice and thick. And if you cover a lot of your mist, that's also okay. Don't worry about that. These will be trees. And I think I'm going to start by making those a little bit darker. They're closer to us. We see those shadows to a greater degree. And my initial application here is just a rough little tapping session. Nothing too defined, but I do want brush strokes in the form of taps, because they're going to give me an indicator of where my trees are. Because all of this hue is very similar, right? The mix that we have for the trees is a little bit darker, but the hue is the same. We're just playing with the value of it to a point. We'll go in and we'll add highlights and we'll really build it out, but in the beginning stages, this texture, this tap is going to be very valuable to us in understanding our subjects. Then we can take the regular mix, make sure that every other area is nice and thick. We don't have any elongated brush strokes, they're mostly just tapped. Here I'll mix up a little bit more. Painting's starting to feel real. Always takes a while, I find, for the painting to feel like you're finding its soul. But, you know, you keep at it, you gain a better understanding, and eventually find what we're kind of meant to create with it. Again, it's a conversation between you and the canvas. Here I'm making a line of grass, which is going to be a bit brighter as a whole. So I'm adding a little bit of titanium white to that. There's a little bit more of that grass up here showing through. Very good. You kind of lose it into the trees and the shadows back here. But it'll all make sense once we start adding those details. Could even add a hint of it into the shadow and the mix through here when you have almost nothing on your brush, just to create more of a transitionary layer. We're just dry brushing at this point. My brush doesn't really have much water. This background doesn't really have any water. We're just adding the hint of hue. And you don't have to do this. This is really just if you want to tie it together a little bit more. Not a right or wrong thing, but a personal preference. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to mix a bit of a brighter mix, similar to what we just had, but slightly more yellow than our orange, though we will still have some orange, slightly more titanium white. We will still have some oxide black. So we're just stepping in that direction of a brighter hue in general. And this might still be a little bit too bright, but I like it a lot, so I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to switch on over to my liner brush, make sure that's nice and damp. And this is essentially going to be for the highlighted trees, the tops of them that are catching light from here. And I'm going to apply it along some of my tree lines by just going in with little taps. And I initially work it around the tops of the trees, and then I slowly work this downwards, like you can see here. But as you can see, it actually looks pretty lovely. It's brighter in the mix than what I initially wanted for the canvas, but you have to take into account that the canvas is darker than the glass that I'm painting on. So it's going to be showing through our semi-transparent, very watery mixes. So we're not rather painting with the pigment that you see on the palette, but we're painting with the pigment that you see on the palette mixed, at least optically, with what's on the canvas. And what's on the canvas is darker. It's earthy, and therefore this mix, while too bright on the palette, isn't too bright on the canvas. That's one of those lessons that took me a really long time to learn. I would spend all this time mixing a color that I thought was perfect, and then I apply it to the canvas and say it doesn't look quite right. And then, you know, you paint for years and you realize, oh, it's not really as simple as what's on the palette. And that makes it fun, right? It's an extra factor you get to play with. And then you might play with toning your canvas. A lot of painters do that. I go through stages. Sometimes in life I like it, sometimes I like to start on a white canvas. I like to start a lot of these lessons on a white canvas. But if you'd like me to start on toned canvas where there's a hue underneath, happy to do some lessons like that, show you how I like to do it. Again, I think that's a big preference thing for how you personally like to create, right? No real right or wrong. It's also worth noting that with a lot of this, I'm applying it to the right-hand sides of our trees as they're on the right hand side of the sun. It's the opposite on the other side of the sun. Right through here, you're just applying it to the top pretty much and letting it work its way down. But a lot of our highlights are done very simply in accordance with where that light is. I'm already really happy with this. Normally it takes a lot longer, but I feel like I've thought about this all weekend, so I'm painting a bit more quickly than I normally would, a bit more confidently. Still making mistakes here and there, and I know that very intentionally, because I think it's important to remember that we all make mistakes. Doesn't matter how long we've been painting. What matters is that we keep our head up, we stay optimistic, and we problem solve until we get it the way that we really want to. Now here I'm going in with a bit of a darker mix to extend some of these down in more unique ways, because you don't want there to be a hard line for all of the trees at the bottom. You want some to protrude lower, some to be higher. It's just going to be a lot more interesting that way. So I'm going in and I'm reworking shadows while I'm simultaneously introducing highlights. And going back and forth is a really good way of sparking that balance. Maybe I'll do another darker one right down here. And then I can grab some highlight for the top of it. Yeah, perfect. Easy. Again, maybe darker through here. The closer we get to us, the more oxide black we can incorporate, because we see more natural hues and values. Add a little bit more yellow to this as we get closer to us. Less orange heavy. We are still going to have oranges in our foreground, but in theory they lessen as we get closer and closer to us. There we go. Softening a lot of the darker values, because I do want this to look hazy at this point in the distance. I think that's a really important part of it. You can have multiple layers of highlight. This one's probably brighter than anything else we've had. So I'm going to interject it in a couple of spots that are really protruding, really catching light. That's going to be more so throughout the central area with little hints out in these spaces too. There we go. It's so subtle, but I think it adds a lot to the piece. Oh, I love that. It's more dramatic than what we have in the reference photo, but I don't think that's a bad thing. We're not going to do too much of it. It's just going to differentiate a couple of our trees and clusters, predominantly throughout the central area. Wonderful. Hope you're enjoying. Hope you're getting excited about your own piece. Again, I know this is a different palette, a different subject than what we typically work with, so it's a lot of learning, it's a lot of practicing, it's a lot of new exploration, and again, I think we just welcome that, open arms, and we have a great time with it. And add a little bit of that highlight into the grass with a more horizontal marking. Now, something else we can do is we can take our liner brush, we can make an even more orange version of that mix. That's right, we're kind of going backwards with this. And we're going to interject some little trees in the even farther distance. But it is important that when we do this, these trees are more warm looking, right? So they can be even a little bit brighter, but they do need to be warmer. You're also probably going to want to make these trees or tree lines look smaller because they are farther away, and the farther away you get with the subject, the more perspective is going to make it look quite tiny. I liked my mix, but I think I needed more orange. So we'll reintroduce that here towards the top. And the orange is a very saturated pigment, so I'm going to add some extra titanium white, maybe oxide black into it. So that'll help me keep it not too saturated. Creating lines of trees here rather than individual ones. Trying to create more openings between my tree clusters and whatnot. These do get lost in the mist that we have down towards the bottom. And you see them predominantly under this light and through the openings of the larger movements. So we're not really going to do this over here because it's just not going to receive light, and the trees just won't be seen in this way. But this area is prime for it. And I do like the subtle addition. So much of this is subtle. So much of this is meant to be one of those things you kind of squint at as I create it. And in your own, you question, you definitely question, is this enough? And if you aren't questioning that, it might be too much. So just try to keep it simple. Less is more. But you can continue those same shapes and ideas back here. And it can work out pretty well. If you do too much, there's always finger painting. See that right there? That's quite bright. That is what we classify as too much. It's okay to make mistakes, because just like that, it is no longer too much. Rectified in under 10 seconds. And you can go back and forth until you have all of the amounts that you really want. Nice and easy. Maybe a little more yellow for the areas that are absolutely closest to us. Okay. At this point, I think we're ready for a much bigger step. Good morning, good morning, good morning. We are back. As you can see, everything is nice and dry to the touch, and we're going to continue on this lovely painting. I think it's worth noting that, these paintings often aren't finished in a singular day. The video itself might be 2 or 3 hours, but it might take me a couple days, if not a week, to put the actual painting together, because you are waiting sometimes for dry time, sometimes you're waiting to just figure things out a little bit better, and there's lots of in between the cuts where I'm cleaning brushes, palettes, water, all of that. So don't feel like you need to rush through your paintings. It's okay to take your time. We are going to continue doing so. Again, it's a relaxed painting, it's a relaxed process. And today, we're going to start by livening up the sun, making this a bit more bright. So I'm going to do that by taking my 1-inch flat-headed brush. We're going to grab some of our titanium white, a little bit of our brighter yellow. This could be a lemon yellow, a cadmium yellow light hue, just needs to be on that brighter end. We'll grab just a hint of our cadmium yellow deep hue because we want this to be bright, warm. We're going to apply it with our filbert brush because it has those nice rounded edges. You're going to begin by placing this around the sun, and then we're just going to work it out, as you can see, in a very rounded motion, building up that light. Then we can get a little bit of water after that. I save the water until after because I want the initial application to be a bit more thick. And when we add the water, we're really going to start thinning it out. And that's okay, but I want the middle to be nice and bright. There we go. Already, we have this nice brighter look. We can also, if you want, take the larger flat-headed brush and blend it out with this if you want a much wider blend. Up to you, but this is just to show that even if you are later in the painting process, you can go back and add light. And the ideal time to do that is when the canvas is fully dry, which is why I'm doing it now on a brand new day. Again, you don't have to do this. You can do this. It's up to you, but you want to do it before we move on to the next step because the next step is going to be quite dramatic. So we're going to start working in some of our greenery and whatnot. Now I'm going to go ahead and sketch that on off camera because it'll probably take me quite some time. And again, if you need help with the drawing process, Patreon up there, nice and easy. But yeah, I'm just going to sketch this on and then we're going to paint it together. Okay, so we have our loose sketch back on the canvas. We're going to begin on the foreground here, and I'm going to do my mixing, of course, with the 1-inch flat-headed brush. We're going to begin with a bit of a darker mix, but a very green one, because as we move forward in the painting, as we move closer to us, we do double down on those greens. So we'll grab said greens, we'll grab a little bit of our cad yellow deep hue, a little bit of our oxide black, hint of our titanium white to thicken it and also desaturate that green a little bit. As you get closer to you, you're going to want to increase the saturation of the green, but you still don't want it to be a wholly saturated green, right? So we'll just mix this up. And then I'm going to begin working a base into all of our base. Everything you see down here. And I'm going to try to do little taps around the edges to create this organic movement of foliage, right? Because we do have room for a lot of it. But this isn't the detailed layer. This is us just trying to get some pigment down, start to figure out the space. So don't worry too much about this. I would just, however, recommend working with a less is more approach. So we're applying it, but we're applying it with the idea that we can apply a lot more later because it's a lot easier to apply more than to go back and paint over or redo. So we're just going to approach this nice and smart, nice and calmly. Working my edges first. I always like to work the edges when I have fresh pigment on my brush because I have the most opportunity to render the sharpest, most intentional markings. And then once I start to run out of pigment, that's when I'll work it back in the canvas because these areas don't require any detail or intentionality. I can just move paint and feel good about that. So we'll continue to do so. The corners need to be extra dark, so I'm going to incorporate a little bit of extra oxide black for the bottom corners. That also means that the edges of the greenery will be a bit brighter, which is nice because the sun's going to be hitting a bit of the edges, right? Where this back part is going to have shadows from the greenery. So a natural vignette makes sense. It's also okay if you have brush strokes in this portion because, you know, it's foliage, it's greenery. It's meant to be organic. And organic we can make it. So This is layer number 1. It's not that thick. That's okay. The titanium white and the oxide black made it thicker than it was going to be, which is nice, but there is still a lot of room to grow there. That said, we do need to let that dry. And while we do, I think what we do is, we'll actually keep this. We'll grab a brand new bit of our cadmium orange because I want to mix this for the body of our trees. Don't need too much of it, which is good because I don't have too much of this cadmium orange left. I think we probably have just enough. But I'll grab this, I'll work it into the color we were just working with. That way it's cohesive with the greens, but it's also perfect. Going to feel a little bit warmer, feel a little bit more brown, because the oranges with the greens and the black and the yellow do mix into something that's a little bit more brown. Now, the actual drawing on the canvas, I used a fine-tipped black Sharpie, which is something I don't typically recommend because you can sometimes see it bleed through the canvas. Typically I use a woodless colored pencil, but I need to buy new ones. So we opted for this today, which is nice because it has a finer line. It's easier to paint in. But because of that, I'm going to have to do some thick layers, multiple layers, to cover it up appropriately. That's okay. It just means the first layer is more about getting a base down than covering that line, right? And it is going to be imperative that we do cover those lines. Keeping them means outlines, and we never want outlines in our painting. Okay. Again, so far so good. We can switch on over to our liner brush. Mine is currently dry, so it's a little more puffy. We can taper it quite simply by adding some water, grabbing some pigment, and then we can just sketch in our little branches as well. You want a very loose touch. The more pressure you apply, the more your bristles expand. You really don't want your bristles expanding in these settings. You want them nice and tight. There we go. That is in fact nice and tight. Let's mix up a bit more pigment. You can do slightly less of the green, but I do still want a little bit of it. The cad orange is the important piece. And as I let portions of this dry, I can go back in and deliver additional markings. Trying to be careful, trying not to go outside of my drawn lines too much. If you find that can be a struggle, you can always switch to the liner brush and kind of go back into those details with it, as I'm doing here. But you can see I kind of bounce around my subjects as they dry. That way I'm not just kind of wasting time. I find sometimes if I'm just waiting for subjects to dry, I'll pick up my phone and then I'll scroll the internet, and then you lose 20 minutes that you could have been painting. And I've been trying to get better at just continuing to paint, just being a bit more mindful of the order in which I do things. There we go. Hopefully, if you're painting along with me, then you have this video up on your phone, and therefore you can't you can't switch the tab to anything else because you don't want to lose your spot on YouTube. And that kind of keeps you engaged in the painting. I think that's important, just focus, being able to zero in on the goal that you're trying to achieve. As you can see, we're expanding these in a lot of different ways. We haven't started on these ones yet, so maybe while I let the others dry, I jump over here. That's a strong start. You can see that I'm also often going back to grab water. It's going to thin my pigment, which means I'll have to do more layers, but the important thing is that I'll get nice sharp markings which are so important in a setting, in a subject like this. You can see there's a lot of overlap too of subjects. I feel like that's important for rendering real depth. There we go. And we're going to make all of this a lot more detailed, a lot more interesting, but we do need a foundation, a starting point, and I think this is going to be pretty good. We're just trying to do lots of little crisscrosses with our subjects. Very nice. You can also have some of your branches be, especially the small ones, less opaque. So the warmth of the sun, all that golden hue in the background works through it. And then you get something that just looks a little bit brighter. A little bit more affected by the general atmosphere and whatnot. I have to be careful with it, but I think it can be quite nice. There we go. And we'll have lots of greenery on these branches relatively soon. There. All right. Now, of course, we have these nice big leafy areas we need to attend to. And I think that could be next on our docket. Or we can go back in and add another layer here. I think here's actually where I want to focus for a second, just because we have our big brush with this pigment. It does have some orange in it, that's okay. That's a-okay. But this layer is going to look a whole lot better than the last because it is layer number 2. Lots of X-shaped patterns to move my pigment around. And now, rather than seeing the white of the canvas underneath the semi-opaque layer, you see the green we just applied, which makes this look darker, more opaque, and again, just more of what we actually want. There we go. You can see that I'm slowly moving into the landscape with it, where initially I was pretty wide, pretty far out, and now that we've kind of established a better understanding of the landscape, I can move in to this space a little bit more. Very good. Very, very good. Okay, now I think what we'll do is actually something kind of similar, in that we're going to take our liner brush, because we have this nice dark green, and we're just going to start tapping on little foliage to the ends of our newly established branches. You're going to want some of these to be in front of the branches, some behind. Again, we're starting with a less is more approach, so going in with all of these little taps. And as you can see, this is very light. And it's not because my pigment is brighter. It's not. You can see the pigment there. It just has a lot of water on it. It's very semi-opaque, which is nice because it looks like light is working its way through foliage. We need to go back and make portions of it much more thick, much darker, but as far as a starting place, this is fantastic. Just like that. Now we'll grab more thick pigment. We're going to go into the middles of these, the clusters, and we're going to build out these darker areas. And then you'll have that variance of the lighter areas and the darker areas, so it'll look like some foliage has more light than others. which will be more dynamic. Still grabbing lots of water. You can see this area is getting pretty dense pretty quick. I really like how it is in the reference photo, so I'm keeping that in mind throughout the process. I can tell I'm starting to lose pigment, which means it's getting brighter yet again. And I'm using that to draw some edges that aren't bright, but aren't dark. And now we're building those mid values. So despite the fact that we're working with a singular mix, we're getting a good range. And I think that's a good skill to hone in on. There we go. I always like to make the branches, the foliage feel like it's reaching outwards to direct the eye and just keep things dynamic. Lots of little crisscrosses in the foliage right now. There we go. Again, softer around the edges, darker, more dense in the center. I think we can build this upwards, a hint, a hair, back down into there. Just give it some more shape, though these will add a lot of shape as well. So I don't want to overdo it. Not to be repetitive, but you know, less is more. Less is more, less is more, less is more. Now we're trying to be repetitive. Trying to instill those ideas. Sure they stick. There we go. Now, we're not just doing this side, of course. We're also working over here. So we can migrate. And this is starting in the opposite way in that this is very dense pigment, quite opaque. So I can kind of show you how to reverse engineer it, because there isn't ever one way to paint something. It's really up to you and your comfort level, how you like to approach a canvas. So here this time, we're starting with the much darker pigment, and as pigment runs out, it gets less and less dark, because it gets more watery, because there's just less paint. And now that it is, I can go back up into this area around the edges, and I can instill those lighter markings, which feel a little more airy and like they're reacting to the mass amount of sunset light they are receiving. There we go. Trying to make sure that we have good definitive shapes, little openings in our shapes. Beautiful. I really like this one. You know, that was our first. We put a lot of care and love into it, but we also learned about our application style, our pressure, our process, and then we were able to take that, work it into this one, and this one I think became even better. Now with that in mind, I'm going to go back to the other one and try to elevate it so that it's on par with what we've accomplished over here. But it's nice to see that growth. It's nice to see, oh, I did it once and it was really good and I liked it. You do it again, it's, oh, I really like that. It's even better, okay. Okay, so I'm learning, I'm getting better. And then it's just kind of a thing of balancing it, which is fine. That's honestly an ideal problem to have. When you do your first layer and then your second one's stronger, you go, okay, well, I guess I'll go back. I guess I'll go back and just make it all great. So I think something I learned with this is the edges are a bit more pitter-pattery, a little more sparse. So I'm going to do even smaller taps towards the edges of these, where initially I think they were a little bit big. I think I was doing a lot of dragging on the edges of this one, where a tap was better, because when you drag with your brush, you do expand the bristles to a point, but with a tap, if it's light enough, you don't really expand your bristles, and then you get these details, which are so, so beautiful. And yeah, I can already tell this is working. So, funny. Goes to show that you can be painting for 20, 25 years. Even so, even with that amount of time, you're still learning through the processes. Different kinds of trees, different lighting, different levels of depth. Always something to learn and grow from. And I love that. All right. Now we are going to let this dry. We're also going to take a couple steps back, just make sure that it's looking the way that we want it to. And whilst we do that, we'll also figure out what we do next in the painting. But again, great start. Okay, so we're back. This is fully dry, and I'm excited to add some highlight to it. I thought about working up here, but I think if we develop this more, we'll have a better idea of what we do with these, and those are really the star of the show. So we want to make sure we do them properly. With that, we're going to grab some of our cadmium yellow deep hue, some of our green, mix those up with a hint of our titanium white, but not too much. We want this to retain its saturation. So I'm doubling down on the yellow, I'm doubling down on the green. I want something that feels warm, like light is hitting it, but I also don't want it to be too bright. Now, we're going to switch over to our liner brush. I'm going to grab a hint of this, and we're going to work our way in towards the edge of some of this foliage. And you can see this bush right here. We're going to essentially mark where that is. So we're just going to work this all the way around to the top edge of it. Lots of little taps. I'm not really doing many drags. It's almost like pointillism, if you've ever painted that way or drawn that way. But we're working those edges. We can work it back in. And once we do start to lose pigment, once it starts to dissipate on our brush, and it does get more watery, then we definitely work our way in. Create those little taps, create those textures, but do so with a less light. That way it looks like the edge of the bush is highlighted from the sun, and everything else is a bit more subtle. You can create areas that are more packed, dense, more little taps. You can have ones that are a lot more open, but as a whole, that's how we're starting. Now we'll grab a bit more of this, and we'll head on up here, and we'll definitely have some additional pigment working its way towards the top, creating different layers of bushes and tops of trees, like so. Oh, you know what I think I just heard? I think in the background, I may have just heard the air conditioner turning on automatically for what might be the first time this year, which is exciting. Again, we live in Toronto, Ontario. It's not too hot for too much of the year, so I really value my summers, but I might actually turn that off, not for the sake of sound, but just so it's a little warmer. Keep that warmth, right? Really celebrate it. That said, I'm going to head on over here. We do have a lot more foliage on both sides. I'm so excited about this. This is going to be one of those paintings I know I put up and I keep up for a really long time, at least until the fall. And then you know, we'll probably do something a little warmer in a different way. And then maybe it comes back out during winter when I'm missing these warm summer days. Speaking of warm summer days, had something kind of funny happen to me the other day. Maybe you've experienced it, but you know, go out to get some pancakes, a little brunch with my friend, we do a little catch up. Important as we get older to make time to see the friends, because it does seem to just get harder to do that if you're not intentional with it. So we're going out, we're on a patio, first patio. We both forget our sunscreen, of course, as one does the first time one experiences the heat of summer. And we're sitting halfway under shade, the patio. And the other half of us is in the sun. So it's nice in that, you know, it's not too hot, but it's not too cool. And then, you know, you're getting home 2 hours later, 3 hours later, you look in the mirror and say, oh, I'm 2 different colors right now. The side of me that was outside in the sun, completely red. The other side of me, still white as a ghost, as again, true Torontonian is post-winter. But such a funny sight. And then every time I saw somebody for the next 2 days, and I looked at them and I'm like, something's different. What's going on here? And you know, it was quite evident. Everybody was nice and playful with it, but yeah. So anyways, this is your friendly reminder to wear sunscreen. Be healthy. Especially if you're like me or you live in a similar climate. Really like how this is turning out so far. I find the first layer, because it's over such a dark pigment, is often very soft. You have to go in with multiple layers to build up anything that has a lasting opacity. But I really like that because it lets you build and build and build. I also recognize this is likely a little tricky to see, but that's kind of the point. It's subtle to the point where it should be tricky to see. You don't want this sticking out, you don't want it being dramatic, you want something that kind of just works its way into the shadows. And a lot of highlights and warmer hues to it soon. But for now, it's more so this gradual build into what we're really looking for. Notice there are lots of little clusters in the reference. We're not just doing big ones. We have a lot of room for depth, and we're trying to take advantage of that. So, again, lots of minute markings as we build up. Now, right now, I think I'm working with too much pigment on my brush. When I try to make the small markings, they're turning into big markings. I'm not necessarily applying too much pressure, so I think I just need to take that pigment off, go back, grab some more, make it, again, relatively watery, and continue our pointillist endeavors. But we're getting to a point where it's becoming more noticeable. They didn't just happen. There's a lot of taps, a lot of layering. And soon it'll get even better. But for now, definitely finding a place with it that I'm relatively happy. Okay. As per usual, as we move into the summer, new season, and painting inspiration strikes for me, I'm curious where the painting inspiration strikes for you. Is there something you're considering painting that you'd like a lesson on? Is there a feeling, a mood, a memory you'd like to capture? Or are you just kind of here and excited to learn and paint with that which I'm inspired by? I think, there are different parts in our life where we're more inspired, we're more ready to create with our own ideas. And there are other parts of our life where we like the idea of painting, but we're not necessarily drawn to any idea in particular. And I think when I was in my early 20s, I was going through that because I knew I wanted to be an artist. I knew I wanted to make art, but I didn't really know what I wanted to paint. And I knew that because I was still young, I needed practice. I needed to put the time in to get good at what I was doing. So, I came up with a plan, a strategy to get a lot better at painting. And I was fresh out of university for art, so I didn't have my professors or classes anymore to kind of keep me accountable. So what I did instead is I told myself I was going to make a YouTube video every single week. I was going to make a painting, I was going to upload it. And, the goal at that point wasn't necessarily to build this big YouTube channel, it was to ensure that I was painting, to make sure that I was getting better, hold myself accountable to creating something. So I would just pick a landscape and I would try to do it in 10 minutes. And some of you probably remember those 10-minute painting lessons. And that, turned into a job, a career, if you will. And that was wonderful. Very blessed to have that experience. But again, the goal was to just kind of paint more and continue painting. And that stage in my life, again, was one where I wasn't necessarily inspired to paint anything in particular, but I wanted to paint, and I wanted to paint regularly, and I wanted to hold myself accountable. So I would just come up with an idea, and I would paint it. And I'm sure a lot of you are in a similar position, because I think we all end up in that position here and there. And I hope that these videos kind of act as something that you can just default to when you don't know what to paint. And you say, I'm not really inspired to paint anything in particular, I don't really know what I want to paint. Hopefully in that scenario you can just open the YouTube channel and say, that's something. Right there, I'll just do that today. You learn how to paint something, you become a stronger artist, a stronger painter, you learn some lessons. You end up with a painting at the end that you're probably pretty proud of. It probably keeps you motivated to continue painting. But yeah, I'm a big believer in just continuing to paint even when you don't have a subject that's necessarily inspiring, because it will make you a lot better at your craft. And then when you are inspired, when you do have that idea, when you need to exercise the ability to absolutely nail it, you are there, you are good, you are ready. This is coming along lovely, by the way. Really like what we're getting done here. Creating lots of little tops of trees and whatnot throughout this section. There we go. We're doing it. We are doing it. Step by step. Again, I know it's a little difficult to see, but that is the point. Right now it is meant to be. That said, after I apply this, I'm going to take a little break, take a step back, make sure we are progressing in the ways that we want to be, and then we'll head back in and we'll double down on our process. Okay, after taking a couple of steps back, I realized that I do really like the shapes, but I need a lot more warmth and highlights. So I'm going to mix in some of our cadmium orange, a little bit more of our cadmium yellow. As you can see, we have a nice sun-soaked pigment. And it's still quite rich because we didn't add any extra titanium white or oxide black. So this should be fairly nice. And I'm going to start applying it towards the edges of some of these trees which are protruding, catching light. Again, doing it all in the taps we've come to know and love. So now we're building not only opacity, but we're building various hues and making this connect with the background as well. So we're accomplishing a lot with this subtle addition, and it is relatively subtle, something still being very mindful of, because it's so easy to overdo it in such a darker negative space. It's worth noting, if you do mess up here and you do apply too much, it's the easiest area to fix up because it is just applying some dark pigment, some green, a little bit of tapping. But, you know, if that can be avoided, if we can just do the right things from the beginning, certainly ideal, isn't it? So, again, we're going in. Lots of little taps. I'm incorporating more drags here because we are getting closer to us. Quite lovely. Then maybe there are more taps and leaves over here. Have it work in. Very nice. Very, very nice. More of it. And this is one of those subjects, one of these applications that you can really just spend such a grand amount of time doing. I'm really loving it. There we go. Trying to keep that contrast with the darker hues and the lighter hues. That's important. This is nice and noticeable. I like that a lot. It's a little bit bigger on this side because we're really close to us. We can see individual leaves and the light they're catching. But as we get up here, we return to more of those tapping motions with less pressure. We'll just slowly build on those. No need to be dramatic with it. We're just keeping it evolving in a subtle way. And then back here, it should almost work its way into the land. Might mean desaturating the highlight a little bit, which we can do by just adding a little bit of titanium white, a little bit of oxide black, a little more green. Yeah, that's perfect. And again, now we have a better variance of hues, which makes all of this more interesting. All right, now we're going to go in with a slightly brighter, more pigmented version, and we're slowly just kind of upping the intensity of that which we're using, right? So here we are, a little bit more cadmium orange, a little bit more titanium white. Build up those highlights in a believable way. minute taps. This is ever so slowly evolving into what we want it to be. And this is one of those unique landscapes where we get to use both of my favorite colors. I love orange. I love green. It's rare you can use them in a landscape together because, you know, when there's a sunset, greens are typically pretty washed out. And if you're doing a green painting, a lush green painting, there probably aren't a lot of oranges in and around. So, kind of in a unique system and setting, which is a real blessing. Do a lot of paintings, but unlikely that we get this palette. I think I'm going to try to find more subjects that utilize this palette for this summer. Double down on the stuff I'm really passionate about right now. Okay. More little leaves. Sun-soaked. Catching that light larger here because we are closer to us, so there are actual brush strokes, impressions much larger on the canvas. Oh, that's beautiful. Real hit of orange. We're getting pretty close to something magical with this one. Just gotta keep going. Just gotta keep pressing on. Keep making those taps. It's not going to happen in the first layer, it's not going to happen in the second. But you keep doing it and you will find your way. That's what we're doing together. It's one thing I love about YouTube and making these videos. I feel like it holds me accountable to doing my best and really just trying to put in all those extra little taps that make the difference, right? I will say, because I make these videos, and the videos can't all be 10 hours long, I do have to omit some level of detail, and you are more than welcome to go in and add more detail than I do, because in theory you have more time to work on it than I do if I want to do these real-time lessons. But again, I think this really holds me accountable to doing a good job, and that's what I love. I feel like if you're going to do anything in life, you give it your all. You commit. You give it love. And I think the world, the universe, whatever you want to call it, returns that love back to you. Returns that effort back to you. And you just do the best job you can. And that's what we're doing. Now my current mix is very watery. So most of the markings I'm making right now, while bright, are going to become quite dark very soon as they dry. So I'm keeping that in mind as I make these taps, that I'm making more taps than I normally would, and I'm adding these taps in darker areas that I normally wouldn't, but because they're not going to sustain their brightness as they dry, I'm okay with it. There we go. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Now we can start working this up into the top areas, but I'm going to adjust the camera so you can see everything a little bit better. Okay, so at this point we are moving back up in the canvas. I'm going to grab more of this highlight and I'm going to start working it in and around some of the foliage that we have up here. Now, I really liked how tap oriented this foliage was, so I'm going to try hard to not make the markings larger or turn them into anything that's particularly elongated. But I do want to add a little bit of highlight to the edges of these because we do now have highlight to the edges of the areas down below, and it only makes sense that this follows suit to a point. Though, because we are up in actual orange-yellow territory, the highlights that we apply here are going to be barely seen. It's super subtle. A lot of what we've been doing is super subtle, but especially this, just because of the area in which it's being presented. And that's okay. I'm just trying to find my way around the edges, add little highlights, and make it a little more three-dimensional before we start working on these big guys right here. That said, so far, so good. Really loving the painting, and that's what's important. I feel like often it takes me a lot longer before I fall in love with a painting. Typically, I have this rule where I kind of tell myself it doesn't really matter how I feel about it until I get to that final 15%, because that's where I think often it comes together. But sometimes in a painting like this, it happens a lot earlier, and you feel great about it from 50%, and that's amazing. Then you kind of get into this mindset of, oh, I have to make sure this is fantastic because it's already something I love, so I can't mess it up, and sometimes that can be a funny feeling. But again, I think we're just off to a really strong start with this, and I really, really like it. Also, apologies for the sound out there. It's quite the horn somebody has. Very powerful. Noted. But there we go. Okay, I think that's a great addition for a lot of our greenery, and it is finally, no it's not. I was going to say it's finally time to start working on these. I'm going to work on these first, taking that same orange yellow that we have, and I'm going to work this onto the side, which is facing the light. So for me here, that's going to be the right-hand side of this one. We're going to be very careful. Again, less is more. We want these to be pretty silhouetted in the end. So I'm making sure the edge has a nice almost glow to it. But I'm not going to do a lot of a blend back. I'm going to do a little bit of a blend back into it. But for the most part, I want this to remain darker. So I apply that to the edge, take off the majority of my pigment. I do a slight blend back with a pretty watery mix. That way as it dries, it gets darker again. And then we can head on over to the other side. This one, because of where the sun is, we're going to apply the highlight on the left-hand side, so the opposite. It's pretty intuitive. I'll do a slight blend back. And we can fix this up, touch it up down the road, but right now the goal is really just to introduce a little bit of depth, trying to add more orange, more warmth, but it can't be too saturated, so the titanium white is also re-interjected. There That's much, much better. Talked about it earlier in the painting, but not going with the first color you mix, but continuing to go through it until you get what you actually want is so important. And we were able to get there. Just a little bit of patience, you know? You can do little dots inside the tree, create a hint of texture. Remember, this is nature, it's not pristine. It's not meant to be. And everything else has this kind of dotted effect. So introducing it here makes sense too. To a much lesser degree, but still to a degree. I'm also doing some very soft line work with almost just watery pigment. And if you accidentally brighten it too much, that's okay, because we can always go back in and darken it a little bit later. That said, so far so good. Now, let's start working on these. We're going to do so with an initially darker mix. I'm going to take my larger flat-headed brush. We're going to grab some oxide black, work that into our mix. We're going to grab a lot more of our green. I want this to be a green heavy mix. It can have a little bit of orange, a little bit of titanium white, maybe a little bit of yellow. But green is the primary hue. And the way we apply this is going to change from leaf to leaf. So I'm going to grab my liner, make sure it's nice and damp. We'll start on this one because it's quite prominent. I'm going to apply some pigment into the very middle. Just reestablish that. I want the top of it to be a bit more thick, so I'm applying more pigment up here, a little more pressure with the brush. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, how would the little protrusions look like they fall? Well, I know that we're going to have them get smaller as we get towards the end, so that's some information we can use. They're not going to overlap too much, though it will happen occasionally. We want the end to be nice and sharp, so the area that connects to the top middle is going to be the thickest, and then we want it to get sharp. So how do we accomplish that? We apply a little more pressure in the beginning, less pressure towards the end. And then we're just going to allow that to build up. Now on the other side, similar idea, but because the leaf is wrapping, we want to assume that it's going to wrap this way. So these aren't going to be moving out in the exact same way. They're going to kind of come in towards the end. So it looks like it's falling more than on the other side. See what I mean? Where this kind of moves out and down, this feels like it's a bit more tight in movement. It's also worth noting all of these markings are very semi-transparent because I'm using a lot of water to get a sharp marking. Means we will have to go back in and do multiple layers, but it means that the applications are the way we actually want them to be. We can go in with a much more opaque marking like this, but here you can see that I'm struggling to get those sharper applications. And there are middle grounds for sure, but you really want to make sure the ends of these are nice and sharp. Now, one like this is going to have the protrusions bend to an even greater degree. As we do more, we feel more practiced, it gets easier. That even had more thick pigment, though if you look at the reference photo in comparison to what I've done so far, you know that all of this, absolutely all of it, will need additional layers. And that's just part of the process. We're making it happen. I try to make these a little small initially. That way I have room to expand them. I think that's a big part of this. I always want to leave room to make them bigger because often you fix them by making them bigger. Here you can see we're also, as we make the middles, the back, more thick, more opaque, it kind of fills in the negative space. That's okay. We're losing detail technically, but in the actual image in real life, the leaves overlap each other. So it's a natural phenomenon. It's a natural case to lose a little bit of that space in between. There we are. Okay, I might go back to this one now that it's dry. Work that center. Much better. Much, much, much better. Remember, we can make these larger now. Good. Good, good, good. I think I might make this way bigger. Again, we leave room for expansion. I like how it overlaps this. It doesn't in the reference photo, but I think it adds a nice three-dimensional element to it. Whenever your subjects overlap each other, it looks more three-dimensional. It's just a general blanket rule. You can see that we're slowly expanding. And we'll just continue doing so. Losing detail as we expand with this one. That's a-okay. There we go. It almost feels like a loose sketch the first time you do it because you're just painting with water basically. And then you double down in the later layers. Okay, so I just took a minute to take a look at it from a distance and I came to the conclusion that I'm really happy with what we're doing. I think if we keep doing what we're doing, we're gonna end up with a beautiful painting. So, let's keep diligent. Let's continue the applications that are getting us where we need to go. Going to work hard to make these nice and sharp. I do think a lot of the success of this piece relies on keeping this area nice, clean, sharp, intentional. So I'm going to double down on real effort through here. I'm also making this a little bit bigger. When I took a step back, I felt like maybe this would feel a little too tight on both sides. So now we're going back, doing more. I'm also doing lots in behind my first layer because we have two layers of these protrusions now. The one that we can see in front of us, but also the one that's behind that we don't see because it's being covered. Because we're looking at the side of this, not the front of it, not the face of it, right? So we're just going to make a lot of these markings. I think that this one is the strongest so far out of them, which is good. It means that we're learning, getting better at the practice as we go through it, which is what we always want, but it also means that I should probably go back and touch up my other ones to a point, which is something I needed to do for the sake of opacity, but now it's abundantly obvious that that extra work can be done and can go a long way in rendering something lovely. So, back we go with more intentionality, more layers, more thickness, more sharp edges. And I think that's the big thing I'm currently working towards. It's getting those nice sharp ends. Sometimes if your canvas has a little bit of grit to it, and mine does, you can struggle with those really fine markings at the end because it kind of gets stuck in the tooth of the canvas. But here's the thing. I like having a tooth of the canvas. I like that grit. I like my paintings to look like paintings. So there's a balance somewhere in there. Making it look real, making it look sharp, but also making it look painterly to a point. There we go. Figured it out. We found it. That's the look. Yeah, that is very much the look. Okay, great. I think I want to double down on the spine of this, but then just show the hint of some on the other side. Like that. Yeah. Now we're getting there. So rewarding. I put a lot of time and effort into this one, and it's certainly paying off. I know where I'm going to put it up to, which is always fun. You ever do that? You think about where you're going to put your painting up as you paint it? What room, what setting? Maybe you keep it in your studio. I do that with a lot of them, admittedly. That way I can use them as references for future paintings. At the end of the day, we only have so much wall space, especially downtown Toronto. But this one definitely is going up. I have an easel in my living room, which I don't paint on. It's more decorative, but it's a place for me to put my favorite paintings as I complete them. And this one is going to get the easel for the summer, I think. Unless we do another one that tops this, which, you know, is always the goal. It's always the goal. There we go. Okay. I think I'm going to swap out a battery because I can see that one needs a little bit of a recharge. And then we're back to the other side. All right, so we are back. Our pigment is nice and wet. I did interject a little bit of water into it with my brush, with my big brush. That way it would remain wet. But now we're going to continue our practice here on the other side. Something interesting about this one right here is that we can see that in the middle is where it's actually thickest. So it's not the very back, it's right about here. That's where it protrudes down the farthest. So, trying to be mindful. And then once I have my basic sketch, I'm going back in with a thicker mix and trying to do the best job we can. You can actually see on the reference photo there's a second leaf that kind of goes out like this, very close to it. So we're just sketching that in and continuing the painting process. Now I might jump to another while I let that dry. because often these do take a little while to dry, and you can't really build opacity if it's still wet. So we're just going to give it a minute, head over to its neighboring branch. And it's always really funny to see a semi-completed one versus one that's just beginning, because there is a dramatic variance. And that is for sure. There we go. Lots of overlap in this one. That's okay. I feel like there's a lot more leaves in the reference photo than there is in my painting. And that's intentional initially here because I can only fit so much detail, and I want to start with the ones that are most important, and then if I have room later on, I will interject more. But I'm starting with an amount that I feel is comfortable. That way I can do a good job with that which is going to be done. Because there will be overlap, and I do believe that overlap is good. But after a certain point, it can look a little messy. And we're going to try hard to avoid that. I think I might bring this one down dramatically. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. You can also see how this is changing as we paint. Go in with an idea, but be flexible in what it turns into. Because often we can improve. Often as we paint more and more, we understand the subject better, the composition better. We just open up our opportunities to rendering something great. That's what we're trying to do. There we go. There we go. I'm not going to lie. I'm really loving this one. Not to pick favorites, but to pick favorites a little bit. This is going to be my favorite of the year, and I can tell already. I've also been looking at reference photos in between my painting sessions of similar images, pieces. And I can tell you right now that I'm going to try to have a brand new favorite in the coming weeks. The goal is always to do one that you like more than the last one. Does it always work that way? No, but that's okay. I think the goal in itself is really important for the painting process. Always just trying to become a better version of ourselves at the easel, right? There we go. Okay. Trying to be very careful because we are in a very open space here, which means all the details are hyper noticeable. When you're in these clusters, the details are a lot less noticeable, but when all you have around you is open sky, maybe some soft distant clouds, everything you're doing is kind of under the microscope, if you will. That is a lot more pigment than I intended to use. I need to adjust it. Okay, not bad, not bad. I like how these feel very draping. It's one thing to paint a perfect palm tree. It's another thing to paint a natural palm tree, one that looks real. And I think this one edges a little more towards perfect, where this one edges a little more towards natural, and it's the combination of the two that makes it believable but beautiful. Okay. Again, great steps, moving in the right directions. Let's mix up a bit more pigment. Oxide black, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of orange, hint of titanium white. There we go. There we go, there we go, there we go. Head back into the centers. Build up the opacity. Often you want the middle to be the most opaque. So it can even be a step to just work your way back into the centers. And then you can expand out from there after the fact. But we're just making all of those middle branches nice and cohesive in this step. Trying to cover up the initial drawing. There we go. Nice and easy. I kind of like to break up my steps sometimes when they're very similar, or when the process of doing a step is very similar. That way I can kind of reset my brain and I can approach things more intentionally again. Because if you're doing the same act over and over, sometimes your brain can kind of shut off, you default. I think a lot of people equate it to driving. But the thing is, you need to stay cognizant of the little changes you need to make, because while you're doing a lot of similar things, they do need to differ to a point. And if you're just kind of on autopilot, that's not going to happen in the way you need it to. So, again, if I feel like I'm just too focused to the point where I'm not thinking, then I do something else. Reset, come back to it. Fresh eyes, fresh perspective, more intentionality. Now here, things are starting to get a lot more full, which is good, which is the goal. I might need to clean it up a little bit as we go, but that's okay. That's okay. Beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Friendly reminder, there's nothing wrong with giving your painting a few words of affirmation through that painting process. Nothing at all. A little more water. Keep it nice and sharp. I feel like we're really hitting our stride. Have the right consistency on the brush, in the mix. That can be a big part of it. Just finding that consistency. It's okay to cover the body of the tree. Don't fear that. There we go. Even better. Now we're trying to differentiate between these a little bit more. And that means working on the spines, making them more opaque. Their leading lines are getting stronger and stronger. There we are. Very good. Hope you're enjoying this subject and this lesson. Again, I know it's different subject matter than we typically do on the channel. Don't do a lot of scenes that have these tropical pieces of greenery, but something about it this summer that just feels so right. Kind of nice to let the brain take you to a place that's very vacation-esque, you know? I always found that. I don't necessarily need to travel to a place if I can paint it. I can spend that time in my head enjoying it. And at the end of it, we get something out of it too. We made something. And that's rewarding. Okay, very nice. Very nice. Now, we're not quite done. But this step, this stage of the painting, is starting to get rather complete. So we're kind of at that point where we should probably take a couple of steps back from the canvas, take a look at it, see how we feel. You know what, I say that. I want you to do this area right down here first. Very simple because it is far away. Grab a little bit of the orange mix that we had before, the edge of it. Show that beautiful warm light. This one's so easy. There we go. Okay, again, I'm going to take a step back, take an honest look at it, and we'll continue from there. Okay, so after taking a couple of steps back, I realized I wanted to close the gap a little bit between our two trees. So I'm actually going to continue this out here. And that means changing the little pieces that fall to a point to be a bit longer as a whole. But I think this is an easy fix. And one that I immediately love. Okay, that's so relieving at this point. Because, you know, you put so much time and effort and then you put a big line through the sky and you say, oh, I really hope this goes as I think it will. And when it does, it is a blessing. Okay, with that, I think I'll expand these just a little bit. We're in an era of expansion, as you can tell, where it's just little bits that help the painting flourish by adjusting the composition slightly. Really just tweaking the composition. Now over here, I think I still pretty much like everything. This could probably be a little bit lower. We'll try that. So far, so good. Just put my finger in wet paint. It is still currently wet. I'm going to be careful lifting it. Okay. No harm. Very good. That does happen here and there. Put your hand down in an area you think is dry, and then it's not dry, and then you're kind of telling yourself, what do I do from here? Often the answer is just to lift your hand in the most safe way possible. No dragging, just straight up will do you the best result. Okay, I like that. I like that. Just a little applied markings on this one. It's a little more in the distance. It's a little brighter. There we go. Nice and full. At this point, I think we can make this one a little bigger now. And letting the edge be a bit more semi-transparent. Kind of want this to look like it's farther away, almost reaching into the background in the sunset. I think we can also take some of this, work it down here, kind of build up the greenery that we had. Give it slightly more vignette with a different kind of greenery, because it's a different kind of plant, and I think that diversity is always a good idea. Okay, good. I think it adds to this reaching effect. Quite a pleasant manner. I think we can work this one down. These are only things we know after we've completed a lot more of the top pieces. But this is definitely working out. Try not to make it too dark, but also not too bright. Yeah, little taps are the answer. Sometimes we can get excited and apply more pressure and make more dramatic movements, but at the end of the day, it's the little taps that get us to the best painting. Yeah. Okay. We can also do additional little trees in the background. This isn't in the reference photo, but I think that it's intuitive enough to add maybe one in the distance like that. Just make everything else feel a little bit bigger, increase that scale that we have. We could do another one over here, but then it might look too intentional. Then we're framing it a little too much. I think it's important that we frame the painting, but not so much so that it looks fake or too produced, right? We already have a lot of framing going on with these two. So, if anything, we can just make this one a little more full. Like that. You know, that is better. Okay. Okay. See the little stuff it makes a difference. That's why we go back. That's why we adjust. That's why we give it our all. Now at this point, I want to re-interject some warmth back up into these areas. So I'm going to grab my brush, I'm going to grab an abundance of our cadmium orange, a little bit of our titanium white, a little bit of our cadmium yellow, hint of our green, just a hint, maybe a little more titanium white, maybe a little more yellow. Beautiful, wonderful color. Should blend well into our sky. We'll take this, we'll extend some of our branches, but also move the light up into them. That way it feels like the ends of the branches have some nice warm light, creates this glowing effect. It's important that this stays pretty damp, because it, like everything else, needs to remain really sharp. Oh yeah. Such a subtle addition, but it makes such a difference. It also makes things look a little more full without making it look messy, which I like. I think it'll make a big difference right up here. Oh yeah. It just works so much better with the rest of the painting now. You know? Beautiful. I'm going to keep that going. I'm going to be more mindful of my pinky finger. Sure, I'm not dipping that directly into paint. Again. At least not this painting session. It will surely happen again. Just not today. Here I'm extending some of these with the orangey yellow, like that. You can see how I do a little bit. I check to see if I like it before continuing to paint, and then I'll grab more. But I think it's really easy to just continue painting, assuming it looks good before checking. My recommendation is check often. Check, 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 check. There we go. Really, really, really happy with how this is turning out. Hope you are too. If you're painting along with me, I hope you're having fun. Hope you feel like you're learning. Hope you feel like you are creating something you are proud of. Hope you are just having fun, kind of putting your brain in this nice warm tropical space. Not sure where it is, but you know, we can kind of leave that up to the imagination. And that in itself is fun. Okay. Going back over areas now, where we can double down on that warmth, should we so choose. You don't have to, but we can. And we're going to extend this a little bit. We can grab a little bit of green, mix these two together, then have more of a transitionary pigment as well. Doesn't have to be one or the other. It can be both, and bridging them can be quite nice. Okay. Doing well. Okay, now I realized we started this branch and it kind of gets lost here, but we should still see a little bit of it poking out towards the bottom. So I am going to mix more of my orange and my green. I'm going to follow through with the idea of it coming back down through here, and then we're going to overlap. Again, I'm not afraid of making this look a little complicated, a little messy. If it makes sense, it's for the best of the painting. I think that makes it way more dynamic. That's great. Now we'll grab some extra green. We'll add that to the spine, the areas that shoot down. Wonderful. Hope this acts as a little reminder that you can be brave while you're painting. You can make the sharp applications, the dramatic calls. The more you work on your painting, the more you'll be informed about your painting, what it could be, what it should be. So just keep painting, keep creating. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you had fun. I hope you feel good. And I hope you are excited again about rendering your own beautiful version of this painting. With that, I am going to remind you yet again, if you'd like help with that drawing process, it is up over on Patreon. You can download the traceable if you just want to trace it onto the canvas, or you can watch the real-time drawing video where I sketch it out onto the canvas, walk you through how I do that drawing process. That way you can also improve at drawing, get a little more comfortable with that. But regardless of how you want to get it on the canvas, there are helps and aids up there. It's also worth noting that up there you can get the ad-free version of this video and videos just like it. You can get hundreds of bonus lessons and lessons that are very, very large on big canvases. 24 by 36, I have quite a few of them. I have a whole folder for it, a whole collection, so feel welcome to look through those. And I will be posting many more wonderful summer pieces like this throughout this summer. So if you haven't already, do subscribe. It's a great way to support the channel directly. It's a great way to get a bunch of bonus videos that'll help you as an artist. It's in the video description, so it's easily accessible. And I am incredibly grateful to everyone who is up there helping the channel directly. Big, big thank you. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be able to make these videos. And I love making these videos. I love creating these, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so. Always gets me so excited to hear that these lessons do make y'all stronger painters, feel better about your creative practices. So keep painting, keep making art, keep having fun with it. I will see you soon with a brand new painting lesson. And again, I think this one was one of my absolute favorites of the year already. So this was great. I am again curious about what you'd like to see in a future painting lesson. Please let me know. All of the tools and materials will of course be, I'll take photos, put them up over on Patreon. And yeah, just thank you. Thank you for being here. I will see you soon, and above all, as always, stay creative.